Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. Good morning everyone. My name is Mulia Fatmaji. I am from class 05 SIGP001 and today I am going to explain about two materials of syntax. The first material is sentences within sentences, specifically complementizer of that and whether, and the second one is WH clauses. So, let's start from the first material. And first thing first, I am going to provide you guys with a brief explanation that will be the basic knowledge of this material. Alright, sentences within sentences. I believe previously we have learned about the idea that a constituent can contain constituents of the same category as itself. For instance, a noun phrase may contain further noun phrases. A nominal may contain further nominals, and so on. This is called recursion. So, we are concerned with the description of sentences that contain sentences as constituents. In other words, with sentential recursion. Here's their sentence 1a. Georgette said she burned the fritters. The verb say here is transitive verb. She burned the fritters is the direct object of the sentence. Now, let's take a look at the tree diagram of the sentence. And from here, we can see that sentence 1a is a complex sentence because it contains a sentential structure as a constituent, right? Next, let's contrast sentence 1a with the coordinate compound sentence 2. He hired the acrobats and you hired the clowns. The two sentential structures in sentence 2 are independent of each other. He hired the acrobats is independent. You hired the clowns, it is also independent. Neither is a constituent of the other. So, they are at the same level in structure. Okay, so that is why they are described as coordinate. So, from here, we can see that the two sentential structure in sentence 1a or b are not the same level of structure. S2 is part of the structure of S1. So, S2 is said to be subordinate to S1, with the emphasis on sub, which means lower in structure, and S1 itself is superordinate to S2, with the emphasis of super, which means higher in structure. Therefore, subordinate sentential structures are traditionally called subordinate clauses. Okay, that is the basic knowledge that we have to know. Because when we want to talk about sentences within sentences, it means there will be a clause that functions as the main clause and another clause functions as the subordinate clause. The sentence Georgette said she burned the fritters is the example of a sentence that contains one subordinate clause. Now, what if a sentence contains two subordinate clauses in it? Don't worry, don't be confused. Look at this example. I thought Georgette said she burned the fritters. As we already know, she burned the fritters is a sentential structure or a clause which is subordinate to the structure of Georgette said, right? But now, in sentence 3, Georgette said is in turn subordinate to I thought, to the structure of I thought. So here we have three clauses in sentence 3. Here's the note. Every clause has a lexical verb. So we can identify clauses in terms of their lexical verbs, referring in sentence 3 to the burn clause, the say clause, and the think clause. Sentence 3 shows that a clause can simultaneously be subordinate to one clause and superordinate to another. In sentence 3, the say clause is subordinate to the think clause. Okay? But the say clause is superordinate to the burn clause. Got it, guys? The burn clause is subordinate to both the other clauses. Okay. The clauses that is not subordinate to any other clause is referred to as the main clause. So, in sentence 3, the main clause is the think clause. Okay? The lexical verb of the main clause is the main verb. In the phrase markers or the tree diagram, the main clause will be the highest clause. Okay. Now, identify the subordinate clause in sentence 5 and the two subordinate clauses in sentence 6. Which is the main verb in sentence 5 and 6? Sentence 5, he reminded the man that he was in command at every opportunity. Sentence 6, the fact that you received no greeting from Mars doesn't mean that it is uninhabited. Reminded is the main verb of the sentence 5, and mean is the main verb of the sentence 6. Yes, all right. Now you have got the basic knowledge about sentences within sentences. So let's dive deeper into the real material, which is complementizers, that, and whether. So we have noticed that the subordinate clauses in sentence 5 and 6 were preceded by that. Once again, let's see the sentence 5 and 6. He reminded the man that he was in command at every opportunity. So the subordinate clause in the sentence 5 is he was in command at every opportunity. It is preceded by that. It is similar to the sentence 6. That is a marker of clausal subordination. It serves to introduce subordinate clauses. When it functions in this way, that is a complementizer. Okay? That in these terms is called complementizer. What is a complementizer then? A complementizer, or also known as subordinate conjunction or a subordinator, is a word or a group of words that introduce a subordinate clause in a sentence. It connects the subordinate clause to the main clause and indicates the relationship between them. Okay? As a complementizer, that fills the C position occupied by fronted auxiliaries in question. We already learned about construction on auxiliaries, right? So there, the C position is occupied by fronted auxiliary. But here, the C position is occupied by complementizer that. Okay, so the complementizer position C is defined as daughter of S bar and sister of the following S. Okay, the representation of the complementizer and subordinate clause in the sentence 5 can be further abbreviated as in sentence 11b. We can see here. From now on, we shall assume that all subordinate clauses are introduced by a complementizer and therefore dominated by S bar. Yes. Now, we can call C as the complementizer position, and in here, the position is occupied by the complementizer that. Yes. As noted, the C position is needed for fronted auxiliaries in questions. Interestingly, auxiliary fronting is only possible in main clauses, never in subordinate clauses. So the explanation for this is that the complementizer that and auxiliaries or fronted auxiliaries occupy the same position, that is C position or complementizer position. However, auxiliaries cannot be fronted to a position that already occupied by a complementizer. Next, I will refer to clauses which can be introduced by that as that clauses. Okay, I will call the clause which can be introduced by that as that clause. So not all subordinate clauses are that clause. Another expressions that can occupy C position and so introduce a subordinate clause is whether. There are several examples of sentences. Sentence 16, Sarah asked whether those stupid sausages were ready yet. Sentence 17, Rashid doesn't know whether his disguise was successful. And sentence 18, whether Rory should be promoted or fired was worrying them. And the last sentence, which is sentence 19, whether Millie will go up in that machine is doubtful. The big difference between a whether clause and a that clause is we can see from sentence 16 where Sarah is reported as asking something. So without actually being used itself to ask a question, sentence 16 does allude to a question. Okay? In addition to functioning as a marker of clausal subordination, whether indicates that the subordinate clause is an interrogative clause. As main interrogative clauses, they display auxiliary fronting and are used actually to ask a question. Whether clauses are subordinate interrogative clauses. They cannot display auxiliary fronting to the complementizer position because that position is already filled or occupied by whether. So it cannot be Sarah asked whether were those sausages ready yet. It is totally incorrect. Okay. In addition to that clauses and interrogative whether clauses, subordinate clauses can be introduced by any other subordinating conjunctions, such as when, after, before, although, and etc. To sum up, or to put it more simple, the difference of the complement that and whether or the complementizer that and whether are the complementizer that is a common subordinating conjunction used to introduce a subordinate clause in a sentence. Meanwhile, a whether or the complementizer whether is a subordinating conjunction used to introduce a subordinate clause that expresses a choice or alternative. It is commonly used to introduce indirect questions or clauses that present two or more possibilities. Next, the functions of that and whether clauses. We shall consider the following functions. First, subject and extraposed subject. Second, complement of verb within verb phrase. Third, complement of adjective within adjective phrase. Fourth, complement of noun within noun phrase. And fifth, complement of preposition within prepositional phrase. But today, we are just going to focus on the functions of whether clauses as subject and extraposed subject. Now, let's take a look at this example. Whether Frank or Bill would be promoted wasn't entirely clear. Now, divide the following sentence into subject and predicate. I'll give you 2 seconds. 1, 2. Okay. Our analysis should show that a subordinate whether clause is functioning as subject because it is placed in the very first position of the sentence, right? So, what is the subject? Yes. The subject is whether Frank or Bill would be promoted. And the predicate is wasn't entirely clear. Yes. Now, we have been analyzing subjects as noun phrases. So we shall analyze these subject clauses as dominated by noun phrase. So for example, sentence 20A will be represented by 21. Let's take a look at the tree diagram here. Whether Frank or Bill would be promoted wasn't entirely clear. So the tree diagram is as one. We break it down into noun phrase and verb phrase. And for the noun phrase, we break it down into S bar. And from S bar, we divide it into complementizer and S2. And the complementizer position is filled by whether. And then S2, we break it down into noun phrase and verb phrase. Here we can see for the noun phrase, we divide it into 3 divisions for the noun phrase. Why we divide it into 3 divisions? It is because neither Frank nor Bill seems more central than the other. Okay, such phrases are called coordinate phrases. Okay, Frank or Bill is coordinate noun phrase, with Frank and Bill coordinated by or. So yeah, there's 3 division in it. And for the verb phrase, we divide it into modals in the past form, and then verb phrase. And for the modals is would, and for the verb phrase, we break it down into passive and verb phrase, where the passive is be, and for the verb phrase is filled by the verb in the form of past participle that is promoted. And on the other side, there is VP or verb phrase. We break it down into verb and adjective phrase, where the verb is intensive in the past form, which is was, and the negative article not. And for the adjective phrase, we divide it into adverb and adjective, where the adverb is entirely and adjective is clear. Okay. In support of having clausal subjects dominated by noun phrase, notice that they can be replaced by a pronoun, it. So we can use it. So it becomes, it wasn't entirely clear. So a characteristic of clausal subjects is that they can be extraposed from under the subject noun phrase note to the end of the sentence, leaving behind the empty pronoun it. So here's the extraposed version of sentence 20A. It wasn't entirely clear whether Frank or Bill would be promoted. The pronoun it takes the place of the clausal subject. It is quite special because it is empty in meaning. It is quite empty in meaning. It simply serves as a dummy subject. We shall represent these extraposed subjects as a daughter of the main clause s, as in tree diagram. I represent it in as 22. So the sentence, it wasn't entirely clear whether Frank or Bill would be promoted. So here's the tree diagram. There is S1 there. We break it down into 3 divisions. The first one is noun phrase, and then verb phrase and S bar. So the noun phrase, it is we break it down into noun, that is it, or the NP itself is the pronoun it. And for the verb phrase, we divide it into a verb and adjective phrase, where the verb is intensive and in the past form, that is was and negative article not. And for adjective phrase, we divide it into adverb and adjective, where the adjective is entirely, and the adjective is clear. And for the S bar, we break it down into complementizer and S2, where the complementizer is whether. And for the S2, we divide it into noun phrase and verb phrase again, where the noun phrase, we break it down into 3 divisions. There is noun phrase Frank, and then conjunction or, and noun phrase Bill. And for the verb phrase, we divide it into modal in the past form, which is would. And for the verb phrase, we divide it into passive and verb phrase, where the passive is be, and verb phrase is the verb in the past participle form that is promoted. So the extraposed subject constructions has a clausal subject displaced to the end of the sentence, and expletive it in the normal subject position, dominated directly by noun phrase. However, there is a handful of special verbs, including seem, appear, transpire, and happen, that cannot have clauses in the normal subject position. With this, extraposition of the clausal subject was optional. Okay, so the subordinate clause could appear either in the normal subject position or extraposed. In connection with our special verbs, then the generalization seems to be that extraposition of a clausal subject is obligatory when the verb is intransitive. So besides intransitive, it is optional to have the extraposition of a clausal subject, or to have the extraposed subject or form. Okay, so yeah, that was the first material, sentences within sentences, specifically complementizer of that and whether. Please don't get dizzy yet, because we still have one more material. Anyone of you remember what is the second material? Yes, the second material is WH clauses. Alright, WH clauses. Before we are going further, let's get to know with WH words. And I believe you guys already know what are they. Yes, WH words consist of who, which, whose, why, what, when, where, and how. WH words can be used to replace any constituent in a sentence. For example, let's take a look at this example, and in the sentence 1, Vince is taking Violetta's icon to a tense. We can replace Vince with WH word who, as in sentence 2. So it becomes who is taking Violetta's icon to a tense. We can also replace Violetta's icon with what, as in sentence 3, Violetta's with which or whose, as in sentence 4, and to a tense with where, as in sentence 5. Clauses that include a WH word are called, WH clauses. WH words can appear in main clauses and in subordinate clauses. As you can see from the sentence 2 until 5, the inclusion of a WH word in a main clause has the effect of making it into a question. We usually call it as a WH question. Yes. Let's compare sentence 3 with sentence 6. Sentence 3, Vince is taking what to a tense? And sentence 6, what is Vince taking to a tense? In both sentence 3 and 6, what there is understood as the direct object of the verb take. But there are some differences, which is, the first difference is what is in the direct object position in sentence 3 but has moved to the front of the sentence in sentence 6. So it is called fronting of the WH phrase. Okay, and the second difference is sentence 6 shows fronting of the tense auxiliary. Okay, so the tense auxiliary is moved to the front of the subject. So it becomes what is Vince taking to a tense. Okay, so the two differences are fronting of the WH phrase and second, fronting of the tense auxiliary. Yes. However, when the case is like the sentence 4, we cannot just front the WH word. Okay, so it cannot be whose or which is Vince taking icon to a tense. It doesn't make sense, right? In the sentence 4, which and whose are functioning as determiners. And here's the note. Only the full phrasal category, noun phrase, and others such as adjective phrase, prepositional phrase, and adverb phrase can be fronted. So it is the full noun phrase containing that WH determiner, which icon or whose icon, that is fronted. So it becomes, let's take a look at the sentence 7, whose icon or which icon is Vince taking to a tense. Okay. As for the auxiliary fronting displayed in the sentence 6 until 8, this is exactly the auxiliary fronting introduced in our previous material, that is about constructions on auxiliaries. Do you guys still remember? So, this is fronting to the C position, the daughter of S bar and the sister of S. So, the next question may be, where does the WH phrase move to? Because the auxiliary fronting is already occupied the C position or the complementizer position. So where does the WH phrase move to? So let's take a look again at the picture 9A. What is Vince blob taking blob to a tense? The blob here used to be the place of tense auxiliary is, okay, but it is already moved to the front of the subject. It is, so we can call it fronting tense auxiliary, and the blob here after the verb taking, it is used to be the place of the direct object or the noun phrase, right? But it is already moved to the very front, at the front, or it is already moved to the front of the tense auxiliary. Okay, so what is the position called, right? Here's the answer. If the fronted auxiliary occupies the C position, the WH phrase gets moved to the front of the fronted auxiliary, okay, which is above and beyond that C position, a second higher C position. And here's the picture. So yeah, the already familiar C position introduced S, while the second C position introduced S bar. So the second higher C position, or the landing site for fronted WH phrase, can be defined as daughter of S double bar and the sister of S bar. So yeah, it is called C2 position. Okay. Alright, before we are going to the example and the tree diagram, I would like to explain a little bit more about the material. Here I have some examples. Sentence 3 until 8. Sentence 3 until 5 here are called unfronted questions, or also known as echo questions, because they ask about something that is said earlier. Okay, it is experiencing direct replacement right in its position. There's no movement. So take a look at the sentence 3. Vince is taking what to attend? The original sentence is Vince is taking Violet's icon to attend. The Violet's icon is replaced with what there? There's no movement. It is stay in its position. Okay, and next for the sentence 6 until 8, it is called fronted questions, or also known as non-echo questions, because they display auxiliary and WH fronting. The question now, what if the WH question is like this? Who will be promoted? The sentence 11 is itself the only possible form for that particular question, and it doesn't sound noticeably echoic. Okay, the sentence 11 is distinctive from the others because there it is the subject constituent that is questioned. Okay, so maybe the first question raised by this example is, does sentence 11 display WH fronting or not? Okay, so without exception, all WH expressions appearing at the front of the clauses are to be represented as occupying the higher C2 position. In moving to the C position, however, a subject does not cross any other expression. So the movement makes no difference to the order of words. And the next question, does sentence 11 display auxiliary fronting? We give assumption that the WH phrase is up in C2 position. Auxiliary fronting makes no difference to the order of words, okay? Because its position is in C1, right after C2, not before C2, okay? So without exception, auxiliary fronting to C1 occurs in all non-echo questions. To be more clear, let's take a look at the tree diagram or the praise marker here. Who will be promoted? Let's make the original sentence. We assume the subject is Martha. So the tree diagram is start from S, and we break it down into noun praise and verb praise. The noun praise is the noun Martha, and the verb praise we divide it again into modal in the present form, and verb praise for the modal is will, and for the verb praise we divide it into passive and verb praise, where the passive is be and verb praise is the verb in the form of past participle promoted. And the next tree diagram for the question sentence, the WH question, who will be promoted, we started with S double bar, where we divide it into C2 and S bar, and in S bar there is C1 and S, and as we divide it into noun praise and verb praise. Verb praise we divide it into modal in the present form, and verb praise we break it down into passive and verb praise. Here we can see that the modal here is experiencing tense auxiliary fronting or auxiliary fronting. Okay, so the modal, the previous modal is will. The modal here is will, and it is fronted to the C1 position. And for the noun praise here, who or Martha, it is also experiencing WH fronting, so it is fronted to the C2 position. Who, okay, so who will blob and blob again be promoted. Okay, so see guys, it is still experiencing WH fronting and auxiliary fronting, but there is no difference to the order of words, because there it is the subject constituent that is questioned, and as subject the WH phrase appears at the beginning of the sentence anyway. Okay, so yeah, those are the two materials of syntax: sentences within sentences, specifically complementizer of that and whether, and WH clauses. I hope you guys can grasp it well, so you can get new knowledge from the two materials. Hope that this explanation is insightful enough for you. Thank you so much for watching and listening. Have a blissful day. Bye. Wassalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh.